For more than 10 years, I've been travelling the world teaching English. My name's Matt. I'm an English tutor from the UK, and welcome to the Ing2 podcast, where I help you improve your English by sharing my stories and those of English teachers and students from all around the world. Welcome back to another podcast episode, everybody. We're really testing your English in today's episode. I'm going to be speaking faster, more like my normal English speaking speed, and we're going to be using some really high-level phrases and vocabulary as I tell you about the final part of my journey around Sri Lanka, which was the Central Highlands and some of the bigger towns and cities in the country. It's a difficult one today. As I mentioned, I'm speaking faster and more like my natural speed. So if you can follow to the end and understand most of what I'm saying, you should be very pleased. I think you're at least at the upper intermediate level if you could do that. Anyway, without any more delay, let's get into today's episode and let's talk about the final part of my memorable trip around amazing Sri Lanka. Let's do it. Right, so the Central Highlands and the north of Sri Lanka then. I think it's a good idea to start by looking at a map of Sri Lanka and explaining where exactly are the Central Highlands. So I've got my map here on my phone, and when I look at Sri Lanka, the island, well, Sri Lanka of course is an island country. The island of Sri Lanka looks like a drop of water. So at the top it's very thin. And then as you go down south, it gets wider and wider. So it looks like a drop of water on the map. Up in the north, you have a city called Jaffna. And then kind of in the middle and on the on the west coast, you have the capital city, Colombo. If you go further down south, along the bottom of the drop of water, you have a lot of beach towns like Galle and Mirissa, and we've been talking about those in previous episodes. And then in the center, you have high mountains and hills. You have some more of the bigger towns and cities in Sri Lanka, which are Ella and particularly Kandy, which is the second city after Colombo. And then on the west coast, there are also some really popular beach and surf towns as well. Most people then, on a 2-week holiday in Sri Lanka, a lot of people will do a circular route, starting in Colombo, and then they'll go inland in the center to the second city, which is Kandy. From Kandy, they'll take the famous train ride into the mountains to a town called Ella. Then from Ella, they will go down south and spend some days on the beach before finishing in Colombo again. So a lot of people take a clockwise route around Sri Lanka. Clockwise means to travel in the same direction around a circle as a clock travels, the clock hands. Now, we did the opposite. So we traveled in an anti-clockwise circle around Sri Lanka. Anti-clockwise means to go in the opposite direction of the clock. Why did we do this? I don't know. Probably because we often don't do a lot of research. We're very busy and we don't like to plan too much. So we don't do loads and loads of research when we travel. We kind of just wing it a little bit. And there's a nice phrase for you guys. To wing it means to do something without a plan. Just see how it goes. So when we went to Sri Lanka, we planned a little bit, but we also winged it for a lot of the journey. And we traveled anti-clockwise. We also went a little bit further north. Not everybody goes to the north of Sri Lanka when they visit. There had been a civil war in recent years, and a lot of the fighting and damage, I think, happened in the north. So maybe people have been a little bit worried or nervous about going there. The war, as far as I know, has ended and it's peaceful now, but I think maybe the north doesn't appeal to people as much as the south does. for a lot of reasons. When something appeals to you, it means it's attractive for you. It makes you want to go there. So the north doesn't appeal to people as much as the south does. We went a little bit north, but not all the way to the top. And we're going to talk about that more later today, of course. But that is the end of the geography lesson. And let's talk about the Central Highlands of Sri Lanka then. So in the last episode, we finished after the safari in Tisamaharama, which is in the south of Sri Lanka, but a little bit inland. And from Tisamaharama, we travelled into the Central Highlands of Sri Lanka to a town up in the hills called Ella. I really like the name of that town, Ella. And we had taken a lot of long tuk-tuk journeys. And although I love the tuk-tuks, we wanted a little bit more comfort this time. So we took a taxi from Tisamaharama to Ella. And I think it took around 4 or 5 hours to get there. Anyway, as you start to get into Ella, you notice the scenery changing a lot. So the south is pretty flat and it's very, very hot. But as you get closer to Ella, you head up the hills and it gets cooler. It's still very, very green. So the hills and the mountains of Sri Lanka are really green, but it's noticeably cooler. And it's actually quite comfortable. Anyway, on the drive into Ella, you start to see what this place is all about and why people visit it. So the road slowly climbs and winds around the mountains. Okay, wind is a nice word when you're traveling in mountains. It means you don't go straight up in a straight line, but you go around and around and around, of course, because you're climbing big mountains. So the road winds around the mountains and you start crossing some really impressive waterfalls. There are monkeys everywhere, of course, because it's Sri Lanka. And you see how green the hills are in the Central Highlands and how cool it is. So the attraction of Ella is that it's cool in terms of the temperature. It's very green. There are loads of waterfalls. You can do some different activities like hiking and climbing. So this is the attraction of Ella for a lot of people. And as we arrived into Ella, the town, my first impressions were that this was a slightly more touristy place than the other places that we've been. So it's kind of like a traditional tourist town. There is a main road through the middle, which is lined with restaurants and bars. And there are a few kind of more lively, more party bars than in other places in Sri Lanka. And as you walk down this street, pretty much everyone that you see is a tourist. So Ella, while it's a really cool, very nice, very relaxing place, it is a little bit touristy, we found. Now, we stayed for 2 nights, I think, in Ella, if I remember, 2 or 3 nights. And we didn't book in advance. There are loads of guest houses and homestays. So you can book a place on your way to Ella. It's very easy to find accommodation. And actually throughout the central part of Sri Lanka, this is what we did. We didn't plan in advance. We just booked a nice little guest house on the way. Often it's like a family's home and they have 2 or 3 spare bedrooms where you can sleep and they make you a nice breakfast in the morning and it's really cheap. So definitely recommend doing that. We had a rest because we were tired. We actually traveled to Ella after the safari. So on the safari day, we got up at like 4 a.m. did the safari and then traveled to Ella in the afternoon. So by the time we arrived, it was evening time. We were knackered. Okay, come on, you know knackered, it means very tired. We were worn out. We were done in. All of these are three really nice ways to say very tired. Okay, we were knackered, we were worn out, we were done in. So we just had some food and had a look around and had a rest on the first night. But on the second day, we went to look for some hiking opportunities. So hiking is one of the best things to do in Ella, one of the main activities, I think. And we hiked to Little Adams Peak, which is very accessible, very easy to get to from the center of Ella. It took us about an hour, I think, an hour and a half to climb up. And from Little Adams Peak, you get a really nice view of the valley and of the scenery all around Ella, which is, of course, hills and mountains. You also get a nice view of Ella Rock, which is a famous site in Ella, and I can't remember what it looked like, so I'm just going to check on my pictures and my map. Yeah, it is what it sounds like. Ella Rock is a big flat rock in the hillside. Anyway, you get a great view from the top of Little Adams Peak of Ella Rock. Now guys, come on, I think we can do a little bit better than a great view, right? Let's think about some other ways that we can describe a great view in English. So we could say a stunning view, okay, very beautiful. A majestic view, okay, majestic is like royal, okay, like a king. So a majestic view, a stunning view. I find myself on this podcast very often saying incredible. I say it all the time, I noticed, but it's an incredible view, okay? I wouldn't say that it's a view that takes your breath away. Okay, when something takes your breath away, it means it's so incredible that you can't breathe. The view from Little Adams Peak in Ella was not that amazing, but I would say that it was a stunning view, a majestic view maybe, or an incredible view. Those are three good adjectives to describe this view, I think. After Little Adams Peak, at the top of Little Adams Peak, we were pretty tired and very, very hot. I mentioned that it's cooler in Ella, but I'm comparing that to the south of Sri Lanka, which is really hot. So although it's cooler, it's still pretty hot, especially when you're climbing mountains. So we were very sweaty and we needed some refreshment. Okay, some refreshment means something usually to drink to cool you down and to get your energy back. And luckily, at the top of Little Adams Peak, there was a nice old man selling coconuts, fresh coconuts. And I am a little bit 50-50 when it comes to coconuts. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I'm not sure, but this one was so good. He cut the coconut open and added some fresh lemon juice. And after a tiring hike, a very hot hike, this really hit the spot. So a nice cold coconut with lemon really hit the spot. There's a nice phrase for you. If something hits the spot, it means it really satisfies the need that you had. So after climbing up the mountain, I really needed a nice, fresh, cold drink. And this coconut was exactly that. It was perfectly fresh, nice and cold, really hit the spot. So it really satisfied me. And it was a good job that we refreshed ourselves because the hiking wasn't over. So after Little Adams Peak, we went back down the hill and hiked to the Nine Arches Bridge. The Nine Arches Bridge. What is the Nine Arches Bridge? It is quite an iconic site in Ella. It's an old train bridge, which I believe was built by my ancestors, the British, back when in the colonial times when they were, building and doing all kinds of things in India and Sri Lanka. The Nine Arches Bridge is a really impressive train bridge, railway bridge, which goes through a valley in Ella. And of course, it has 9 arches. Okay, so an arch is like a door shape. It has 9 of them. You can walk along this bridge, but be careful because trains do come across it. And we actually went to a little restaurant or bar which had a really cool view of the bridge. We had another cold drink there and waited to see a train coming, but I don't know what happened. A train was scheduled to come, but it just didn't arrive, but it's fine. We saw some monkeys swinging in the trees, which is good enough for me. I'm happy to watch that. So, two really nice, easily accessible hikes if you go to Ella for a short time are Little Adams Peak and the Nine Arches Bridge. If you're a really serious hiker and you have more time, there are some really good trips and expeditions you could do in Ella, but you need good gear and you need to be prepared to camp and this kind of thing. We didn't have that. So for us, Little Adams Peak and Nine Arches were perfect. Really cool little hikes to do. Right, guys, I realise I'm speaking quite quickly today, and it's because I don't have much of a plan for this episode, but I do think that maybe that's a good thing. I'm hoping that you're following everything I'm saying, but I'm aware it's going to be a challenge for your English, but that's good. You've got to push yourself and test yourself, right? So hopefully you're following everything that I'm saying today, but I am speaking a little bit faster, and that's not intentional, but hopefully it still gives you a challenge and you enjoy listening to it. Now, the second day in Ella, we didn't have much of a plan. We took it quite easy and we grabbed a tuk-tuk to try and find some of the famous waterfalls around the town. And once again, we had a tuk-tuk driver who was just an absolute legend, such a legend. There's a nice way to describe somebody who really helps you and that you really like in British English: a legend. Okay, somebody does you a big favor or helps you a lot, you can call them a legend if you really like them. This tuk-tuk driver, once again, quite an old man, but just so nice, so friendly, so smiley. And he took us to some waterfalls, and my plan was to go swimming in the waterfall. I love to swim in rivers and lakes and waterfalls if I can. Anyway, he took us as far as he could in the tuk-tuk, but the final kind of kilometre, the road was not drivable, so we had to walk it. And we got a little bit lost trying to find this waterfall. But then a really funny thing happened. We turned around and there was our driver. He'd actually, instead of waiting in the tuk-tuk, he actually came to find us because he was really worried about us. He was worried firstly that we would get lost, which we did. And then secondly, he was worried that we would swim in the waterfall and get into some trouble. So after he found us, he took us to the waterfall and showed us this waterfall, which was really cool. It was nice. And he said, please, please don't swim in here, because some tourists had done that and they had, well, died, unfortunately. Some tourists died there. And there'd been some rain not long ago and the water was pretty strong. He was very, very kind of worried about us, saying, please, please don't do it. Don't swim in the waterfall. So we listened to him and we didn't swim there. We took a nice selfie with him, the driver, to remember the moment though. And it does remind me actually of a lesson that I learned about swimming in waterfalls when I was in China. Me and some friends, we had a nice spot in the mountains near where we were working in China, and we often went there to swim in the river and the waterfall. One day, it was during the World Cup actually, World Cup 2018. England had just beaten Colombia on penalties, and that match was very late at night in China. But me and my friends, we stayed up to watch it, and we kind of, we were very happy because England won, and we ended up partying a lot that night. And in the morning, we went straight to this river where we often went swimming. And it had been raining and the river was a little bit higher and a little bit faster than it usually was, but we still jumped into the waterfall. And as I tried to swim out of the waterfall, the current, which is the movement and the pull of the water, the current pulled me out of the pool and down the river, and I started, going down, being carried away down this river, and it was very scary. I didn't know what was behind me, and I was very close to falling off another waterfall, but thankfully my friends came and rescued me and helped to pull me out of the water in time. So I learnt after that it's not a good idea to swim in waterfalls and rivers if the water is strong. So this time in Sri Lanka, although I really wanted to swim in the river, I listened to the driver and didn't do it. So that's pretty much everything in Ella, really. That was all that we did. I liked the place. It was very nice, but it was a little bit too touristy compared to other places in Sri Lanka. But it's worth visiting 100%. And one of the main attractions with Ella is actually getting there. So they're one of the most iconic and famous train journeys in the world goes from Kandy, which is the second city in Sri Lanka, to Ella. But you could also take it the other way from Ella to Kandy, which is what we did. So the Kandy to Ella, or the Ella to Kandy train journey then, I think if you go to Sri Lanka, it's something that you must do. Any trip, any holiday in Sri Lanka is not complete without experiencing this train journey. So how could we express that in English then? A couple of ways. We could say the train journey is an unmissable part of a trip to Sri Lanka. We could say it's a must-do activity in Sri Lanka. And maybe we could say this train journey is not to be missed. Okay, so the train journey is unmissable, it's a must-do, and it's not to be missed. And although we had already done a really cool train journey from Colombo to Galle, which I talked about 2 episodes ago, we thought we have to do this train journey. You can't go to Sri Lanka and not do it. However, it is quite long. And although when you look on the map, Kandy to Ella doesn't look that far, it takes so long because this train winds through the hills, through the tea plantations. Remember that word wind, which describes the way that something travels around mountains. Now, on a lot of blogs, I've seen different answers for how long this journey takes, and I'm still confused. Some blogs say 7 hours, some blogs say 8 to 10 hours, but for us, it was about 13 hours. Okay, it was really long. And a couple of explanations for that, I guess. If you go from Kandy to Ella, you travel uphill. If you go from Ella to Kandy, you travel downhill. That would suggest that Ella to Kandy should be faster, right? But that's the route we took and it was slower. Another explanation could be that there is another town or another destination near to Ella, which is called Nuwara Eliya. And I noticed that a lot of people got off the train here. So I'm guessing that some people only go from Kandy to Nuwara Eliya, maybe not the whole journey from Kandy to Ella. So it was a really long journey, okay? It took, I think, between 11 and 13 hours for us. And as we'd already had a really, really cool experience on the train sitting in second class, although that was a great experience, it wasn't very comfortable. And because we'd already done that, because we'd already ticked it off our list, we wanted a bit more comfort this time. So we booked... Oh, I'm getting lost with the classes of the train now. I think on the previous train we were third class. This time we booked second class. We wanted more comfort. I used the phrase there, guys, that we'd already ticked a train journey off our list. Okay, when you have a list of things to do and you do one of them, you can tick it off your list. Nice phrasal verb. To tick something off means to complete it on your list. So we'd already ticked off a train journey and we did it in the lower class. This time we had a longer journey, so we wanted more comfort and we booked second class. Now the journey for us was still very cool, but in second class, everyone was a tourist. Everyone was a tourist. So I would recommend, if you're only doing this one train journey in Sri Lanka, do it in the lowest class you can find. Okay, it's not going to be comfortable, but you're going to get a more authentic, a more real experience, which is something you won't forget. Anyway, the train journey itself then, what is the attraction? Well, the attractions are the views of the tea plantations. You know, the tea industry in Sri Lanka is huge. It's one of the main industries in the country. And these tea plantations in the hills just go on for miles and miles. And of course, it makes the scenery very, very green. The train also goes through some forests and over waterfalls, and you get this incredible view out of the window as you're traveling along. And it's a very Instagrammable journey as well. Instagrammable. I'm sure you know what I mean by that one. It means that you can take pictures that will look great on Instagram. So the trains in Sri Lanka, because they are not so well air conditioned and it's very hot, you can open the windows, you can open the doors, and you can kind of sit in the open door or even hang outside of the open door if you want to. So everybody on the train is doing this constantly, you know, trying to get the perfect Instagram picture. And it's a nice thing to do. It's very fun. We did it, of course. We sat in the open doorway and had a little try at hanging out of the door as well. But the local people really do this, you know, to cool down, not just to take an Instagram picture. One of the highlights of the train journey for me was when we stopped somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the mountains at a village. And the train stopped here for quite some time. And as it stopped, a lot of local farmers brought bags of vegetables and food, and they were selling it through the window of the train. We noticed one local guy, there was one local guy in our cabin, and he bought so many vegetables. Like, he was buying loads and loads of vegetables through the window of the train. And we asked him why he did this, and he said because the quality of the vegetables grown in the hills was much, much better and much fresher than what he can get in the city. And also he did it to help the local farmers, which I think is very, very cool. And it was a really cool thing to see as well. They also come onto the train to sell snacks. You can buy these little fried snacks, and we bought some of them. And they were given to us wrapped in paper, which looked like somebody's homework. So I'm guessing the man who was selling these snacks took a page out of his grandchildren's homework book and used it to wrap snacks to sell on the train. So these are some of the really cool, authentic experiences you can get riding the train in Sri Lanka. And it is unmissable. You have to do it. I think, I think you do have to do the Kandy to Ella train if you're only going to do one train journey. But I think for us, the better experience was the train from Colombo to Galle, probably because it was our first experience on the train in Sri Lanka, but it felt a bit more authentic. Like, on that train journey, we were the only tourists. Everybody else was local. But on the Ella to Kandy train journey, pretty much everyone is a tourist. There are only a few locals in there. We did notice something that's really interesting though. So as we were in the cabin, as the journey kind of went on and on, a group of women got into the same cabin as us, local women. Okay, I know I've said that there were no local people on the train, but now I've told you stories about two different local people, so I'm contradicting myself a little bit here. To contradict yourself means to say the opposite of what you said was true. Okay, so I said there are no local people, but now I'm telling you there were local people. So I'm contradicting myself, but there were a few local people in the cabin. So this group of local women got on the train, and what was interesting was that they started talking to us, but they didn't really speak directly to me. They spoke directly to Michelle. They were speaking to her a lot, asking where we're from, what we're doing, and so on. And what we realized is that often it seems in Sri Lanka that men and women kind of work separately. So men will speak and communicate directly to men, and women will speak and communicate directly to women. The reason we noticed this was most of the tuk-tuk drivers, most of the hotel managers, that we had met so far were men, and they all seemed to speak directly to me rather than Michelle. So they'd be very, very chatty, you know, always asking, where are you from? You know, what are you doing? But they'd always speak to me first. And this was the first time that anyone had kind of spoken to Michelle first. And when we thought about it, we noticed that when we saw groups of people in the streets, it was mainly always boys or men together with boys or men, and women and girls together with women and girls. So I researched this a little bit, and it seems that it's kind of a respectful thing in Sri Lanka that, you know, men address men and women address women, and they kind of have their privacy apart. And I don't know if that's a great thing, but to me it seemed quite good, you know. It's very respectful, at least, anyway. But yeah, that was something quite interesting that we noticed. Anyway, that's the end of the train journey, really. I don't have anything else to say on that one. Do it if you go to Sri Lanka, but be ready for a long journey, and do it in the lowest class you can, because you're only going to do it once. Anyway, so the end of the train journey for us was the city, or maybe the town of Kandy. And again, I love the name of this city, Ella and Kandy. Very cool names. Kandy is the second city in Sri Lanka. So the capital is Colombo. The second city is Kandy. And the city all centers around a big lake in the middle, which is called Kandy Lake, of course. So everything that goes on in Kandy kind of goes on around this lake. The lake is the center of the city, let's say. Now, what to do in Kandy? Now, I think the best thing to do is just to be there and just experience being in this town. There are not loads of attractions, but it's just a very, very cool town to be in. It really feels like something from a movie. It looks very exotic. And one thing you have to do is to do a walk around Kandy Lake, because I've said in previous episodes that you don't need to go on a guided safari in Sri Lanka. Just get yourself out somewhere, walk around, and you'll see loads of animals anyway. And Kandy Lake was a good example of this. So we had a good walk around the lake and saw all kinds of animals, including water monitors. Water monitors. I bet you don't know what that is in English. A monitor is like a big lizard, very, very big lizard, almost the size of a crocodile. And there were a lot of them around Kandy Lake, just basking in the sun. Okay, so a lot of water monitors just basking in the sun. Basking, it means to be lying and letting the sunlight hit your body, similar to sunbathing. Okay, so these water monitors were just basking in the sun next to the lake, and they're absolutely huge. Some of them were so big. We also saw them swimming in the lake as well. Again, we saw monkeys, of course, no surprise, but also some very cool fish in the lake as well, which got me excited because I love fish, of course. So you can have a nice walk around Kandy Lake and just observe the scenery and all the animals around you. The other thing that you must do in Kandy is to visit the Temple of the Tooth. The Temple of the Tooth. And this was an interesting one. The Temple of the Tooth is a very, very important temple and place for Sri Lankan Buddhists. Very important. You can go in as a tourist, but you have to follow the rules carefully. You can't wear shoes in there, and you also have to cover your legs. You can't wear shorts when you go in. But there are a lot of local people visiting to pray as well. So it's a very, very important temple for them. Why is it called the Temple of the Tooth? Because inside the temple is believed to be the tooth of the Buddha. So there is a tooth relic which is said to be the Buddha's tooth. What is a relic? A relic is a very, very old historical item. Okay, so I don't know when the Buddha lived, but it was thousands of years ago. This tooth came from the Buddha, so it's now a relic. It's a very important, ancient historical item, and it's inside this temple. So it's somewhere you definitely should visit as a tourist, but don't expect to see the tooth, because you can't see it. It's hidden inside a shrine. A shrine is a place to pray. So the tooth is closed inside this shrine and you can't see it. But it's a very interesting story, very long, very complicated story, and you can read about it in the temple as well. And that was Kandy, really. We only spent 2 days in Kandy, and then we were back on the road again, traveling to Sigiriya. Sigiriya. So Sigiriya is a small town a little bit further north. So we're traveling from Ella to Kandy, straight through the middle of Sri Lanka in the center. And then from Kandy, you go a bit more north to Sigiriya, also very central. And it's not too far from Kandy. Now, if I had any regrets about our trip in Sri Lanka, it would probably be not spending longer here. We only spent 2 nights in Sigiriya, and I think it's worth spending more time there. In terms of the actual town, the town is very, very small, but there are a lot of things to do nearby. So Sigiriya itself is an ancient fortress. Okay, a fortress is similar to a castle, and it's very, very unique. There is just this big rock sticking out of the ground, and the fortress was built on top of this rock. You need to look at some pictures to truly appreciate it. It's very, very unique. All around the bottom of the rock, you can see the old ruins of the fortress as well. Ruins are old, where an old building has obviously been destroyed, but the ruins are the parts that are left. So you can see bits of this old fortress all around Sigiriya. These are the ruins of the old fortress. Now you have 2 choices when you go to Sigiriya. You can climb the actual Sigiriya rock, so climb up this weird rock and walk around inside the old fortress. Or you can climb another strange rock, which is very close by, called Pidurangala Rock. Pidurangala Rock. And from Pidurangala Rock, the top of it, you get a really cool view of Sigiriya Rock. And this is the choice that we went for. So we climbed Pidurangala Rock. Now, the best thing to do, it's very, very hot in Sigiriya, very hot. So the best thing to do is to get up at sunrise, very early, go up the rock. Even if you can do it before sunrise, you can watch the sunrise from the top of the rock. But we were too lazy. We were just too lazy. So we got up a little bit later than sunrise, still in the morning, and we went to climb the rock. Now, Pidurangala Rock is also a very important Buddhist site. So to get to the trail to climb the rock, you have to pass through a small temple. You need to take off your shoes and cover your legs here. And the walk to the top is very, very steep and includes a little bit of scrambling to get there. Scrambling doesn't mean scrambled eggs. Scrambling is a style of climbing. It's between walking and climbing. It means you don't need to pull yourself up with your hands, but you do need to use your hands a little bit to get over the rocks. So to get to the top of Pidurangala Rock, you do need to scramble a little bit with your hands and your feet. And it's very hot, remember, so you're walking through jungle, really, to get to the top of this rock. It's very, very sweaty. But when you reach the top, it is so worth it because the views, I'm not going to use that word, I'm not going to say incredible view, but like I taught you earlier, it was majestic, it was stunning. And this view was breathtaking, okay? It did take your breath away. So it was so amazing that, you had no words. Really, really stunning. And we just sat on top of this rock looking at this view for a long time, actually. Partly because we were so hot and tired, but partly because the view was just so unbelievable. We sat looking at this view in awe. So we were staring in awe. There's a nice phrase, guys. In awe. The word is spelled A-W-E. So when you look at something in awe, or you stare at something in awe, you're just looking at it and not thinking about anything else. You're looking at it in amazement, okay? So the phrase is to look at something in or, but notice my pronunciation. To make it more natural, we blend in or together. So we look at something in or. Nice. So we sat on top of Pidurangala Rock and just looked in awe at the view of Sigiriya Rock below. And we stayed in a very nice little guest house in Sigiriya with a quite eccentric owner who said that he made the best breakfast in all of Sri Lanka. And it was pretty good. It was good. It was definitely very big. But to be honest, Sri Lankan breakfast is not my favourite breakfast in the world. It involves sometimes curry and a lot of dal. Dal is a type of curry. But yeah, the guest house owner was very, very nice, very eccentric. Eccentric means a little bit crazy, but in quite a funny, quite a cool way. One of the evenings that we were staying in Sigiriya, we went into the town to get some food, and he told us if we come back after 8:30 p.m, don't walk back. Make sure we call him and he will come to pick us up in his car. Can you guess the reason why that might be? That sounds quite scary, right? But the reason is actually very, very cool. The reason was that after 8:30 p.m, elephants often walk through Sigiriya. It's on their route back to where they spend the night. So he told us that if we're going to come back after 8:30, don't walk, because we might run into the elephants and it could be very dangerous. And this is why I wish we stayed in Sigiriya for a little bit longer, because around this part of Sri Lanka there are huge numbers of elephants, and it's quite common to see elephants just when you're driving around the road, just in the fields. We didn't see that, but many people have seen that. But what I did notice was that in the farm fields, there are a lot of farm fields around this area of Sri Lanka, but they all have like a tree house in the middle of them. And I researched this a little bit, and there are quite a lot of problems in this part of Sri Lanka with elephants coming onto farmland, maybe eating plants, eating vegetables, and farmers getting caught in the field and sometimes being killed by elephants. So they have these kind of tree houses where if they're working in the field and a group of elephants come, they can escape up into the trees to protect themselves. So for tourists, while it could be an incredible thing, oh, I keep saying incredible, while it could be an amazing thing to see elephants in the fields, for the local people, this does cause quite a few problems. And it's great that elephants are being protected now and their numbers are growing, but as that happens, they come into contact more and more with the local farmers, and it causes some issues. But yeah, I think it's just so cool to think that we couldn't walk back to our hotel because there might be some elephants coming down the road, although we didn't see them. So I do wish we stayed a little bit longer in Sigiriya, but we didn't. We headed quickly off to Anuradhapurna, which was our final stop in Sri Lanka, and the most northern point of our trip. So Anuradhapurna is quite north, actually. It's not in the very north, but yeah, it's as far north as we went. And a lot of people skip this on their Sri Lanka itinerary, but we just wanted to include something a bit different. Anuradhapurna is an ancient capital of Sri Lanka, so you can find a lot of ancient architecture there. And it's also a very important Buddhist site. There are a lot of ancient temples, and the main activity in Anuradhapurna is to go temple hopping. Now that's a phrase that I might have created myself, I'm not sure there. But when we say to go something hopping, we mean to go from one to another, to another, to another. So very often we use this with a bar. So we go bar hopping. Maybe we go to one bar, have a drink, next bar, have a drink, next bar, have a drink. You could even go city hopping, maybe. You go to one city, have a look, next city, have a look, next city, have a look. But in Anuradhapurna, you can go temple hopping. And that's what we did. We rented bikes and biked around the town, the village, for the day, and went to check out some different temples. And yeah, it's cool. I mean, it depends what you're into, right? It depends what you like. We'd already seen a lot of incredible things I keep saying incredible. We'd already seen so many things in Sri Lanka that blew our minds, particularly the animals. That's what we really enjoyed. When something blows your mind, it kind of, it just impresses you. It amazes you so much you can't believe it. So a lot of the wildlife in Sri Lanka really blew our minds. Okay, we couldn't believe how amazing it was. We had no idea before that it would be this unbelievable, this amazing. So for us, Anuradhapurna it felt like the end of the holiday. It was cool to see the temples, but for us, the temples were not as impressive as the nature and the wildlife that we'd seen earlier. So if you have a lot of time, go to Anuradhapurna, have a look. If you're very interested in temples and ancient culture, or if you're religious, if you're a Buddhist person, go and check out Anuradhapurna. It might be very interesting for you. But it's not an essential on your Sri Lanka itinerary, I don't think. It's not unmissable, okay, like the Ella to Kandy train ride is. And it was so hot as well. We were riding those bikes around there and we were sweating buckets. Okay, it was so hot. So to sweat buckets, as you might guess, it means to sweat so much. Particularly me, I was sweating buckets riding my bike around Anuradhapurna. And that was the final stop for us, Anuradhapurna. After Anuradhapurna, it was back on the train, back down to Colombo, and the next day we left Sri Lanka after what was an unforgettable trip in one of my favourite countries. It definitely makes my top 3, Sri Lanka. Now, I haven't mentioned anything about Colombo, and before we began our tour around the country, we actually spent about 5 days in Colombo as we were finishing off some work online. And most people skip Colombo, so they fly there, but they leave straight away. And I would say, don't do that. Spend a day or 2 in Colombo, because it is actually a really interesting place. It's the capital city. It can be very busy in certain parts, but when you experience that, that's still very cool because you see how people live in this city. It's very chaotic, very busy down certain market streets, but it just feels, very different. I would recommend checking out Colombo if you can. Of course, it's not the main attraction for people in Sri Lanka, but why not have a look around and spend a day or 2 there at least? It's worth it. That is the end, unfortunately, of 3 podcast episodes on Sri Lanka, and I've really enjoyed. It's now November, nearly December, and while I have had some exciting trips and some great experiences since then, it's been really nice to look back at my trip in Sri Lanka and just reminisce about all of the great things that I saw. To reminisce means to talk happily about happy memories in the past. Okay, so I've been reminiscing in this podcast about my trip to Sri Lanka, and it's been great to relive that. I mentioned already that Sri Lanka makes my top 3 favorite countries. It's very difficult to say which country is my favorite, but without a doubt, Sri Lanka is in the top 3. And what makes it so great? Why did I really fall in love with Sri Lanka? There are a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, and these are in no order, so it's not like this is the main reason, this is the second reason. These are just the reasons that I can think of. Firstly is the nature. So I was blown away. I had my mind blown. I've used these phrases already in this episode, guys, by the nature in Sri Lanka. When we were planning the trip, I was really looking forward to seeing animals, but I didn't quite realize just how good the nature in Sri Lanka was and how spread out it is. So you don't, like I say, you don't have to go for a safari. You can see amazing nature everywhere, in the towns, in the cities, and just take a walk down the road and you'll see monkeys and other animals. So for me, that was amazing. Not only the animals, but also the plants as well. So particularly in the south, as you're walking around, there are coconuts everywhere, mango, papaya, it just grows everywhere. And it feels like a really abundant country where animals, fruit just grows in every place. Abundant means there are plenty of something in that place. So in Sri Lanka, animals and fruit are abundant. It means they are just everywhere. There are plenty of them for everyone. So that for me was, I don't think I've ever been anywhere that has so much nature just right there, always. And that was a huge thing for me. Secondly, it was the people and the lifestyle, the attitude, and the personalities of the people. So we met some of the kindest people that I've ever met, really, especially the tuk-tuk drivers. When we took kind of 3 or 4 hour tuk-tuks, we really got to know the drivers pretty well because they were very chatty. They always wanted to know about us, and we would ask them about their lives as well. And they were just so friendly and very, very kind, you know, always willing to help out if they could. Great example was the tuk-tuk driver I talked about today in Ella, who came and was, you know, very worried about us and wanted to make sure we were safe. But all of the drivers we had were like this. They were also smiley and happy and just seemed very happy all the time. Apart from this then, there were also the guest house and hotel owners that we met who were very similar, really, very, very smiley, just seemed to be happy all the time, and just really happy to help with anything that we needed. And it made me think a little bit about the lifestyle of people in Sri Lanka. And you know, as a European, as a British person, I have to think about this, think about what I'm saying here a little bit, because I don't want to, perhaps I need to understand my own privilege a little bit here. So, but what I really like in Sri Lanka is that life seems much simpler. I didn't really see anybody with a smartphone. A lot of the tuk-tuk drivers had kind of really old Nokias or Motorola style phones. The houses that I saw were quite simple, but they all had fruit trees and coconut trees growing in their gardens. It didn't seem like people were very stressed at all, and it didn't seem like they had the kind of 9-to-5 work culture that we have in Europe, in America, in a lot of Asia now as well. And a lot of the train stations and the buildings look like they haven't really changed for a very long time. So for me, I feel like what I want to say is that I feel like the people in Sri Lanka, although they don't live a modern lifestyle, I feel like they're living life in a more proper way, in a better way than a lot of people in the modern world are living. They're very close to nature. They have a lot of community around them. If they're, you know, they can go and eat fruit from the trees, eat coconut from the trees, instead of buying it wrapped in plastic in the supermarket. And they seem very happy. They look very happy. They're very, very smiley. And when you compare that to walking down a street in London, for example, where everybody is very stressed, everybody is looking quite sad, the weather is very grey, you can only see tall buildings, no nature around. It just makes me think that people in Sri Lanka are living in the right way, or partly in the right way anyway. Now, the reason I say I have to be careful with what I'm saying here is, of course, that compared to Europe, compared to the West, a lot of Asia, people in Sri Lanka financially are not so rich. And I'm sure that, you know, I was only there for 2 weeks, but I'm sure that there are a lot of difficulties that they have in their lives as well. But from my perspective, during my short time in Sri Lanka, I have to say that I think they're doing a lot of things right in the way that they're living close to nature and living a laid-back lifestyle with lovely natural food all around. Those are the two main reasons that I really fell in love with Sri Lanka: the nature and the people and the way that they lived. Now guys, that's the end of today's episode. So there wasn't a great plan for today. We did have some nice vocabulary. It was a very advanced podcast episode today. I spoke quite quickly. So if you've followed and you've understood most of what I've been saying, very well done. That is an indicator, I think, that your English is at least at upper intermediate level. So you should be proud of that and very well done. Now, moving forward then, it's the end of Sri Lanka, and after that we headed back to Europe, to Italy, and we spent 2 months in Florence, living and working there. And if Sri Lanka was the high point of this year for me, Florence was the low point. So we're going to start to discuss that and talk about why that was next time. And of course, there's going to be a lot of English learning content in there for you as well. Something I would like to do more with the podcast, guys. I generally have a plan for the English content each time, but I would like to answer more of your specific questions during the episodes as well. So if you do have anything, any particular part of English that you're struggling with, or anything that you would like specific advice on, get in touch with me and I'll try to include that in future episodes for you. But if not, remember to have a great week wherever you are. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.